Hi, this is episode 36 of Bible Mechanics, and today I want to talk to you about cross-references. I've been talking about concordances, talked about mainly about the exhaustive concordance, and then also the fact that Bibles will sometimes have a selective concordance. An exhaustive concordance won't fit in a Bible. You have to get a separate book for it, or I think most people go online. It's easy enough to find one. In fact, if you just type in Strong's exhaustive concordance, I'm sure you can find it pretty easily. But the one I'd specifically recommend is the one that the Lockman Foundation has put up, connected to the 1995 New American Standard Bible Translation. And if you just go on my website, JesusChristInTheBible.info, and find the search button, and look for concordances, and there'll be a link for it there. The Lockman Foundation has this that I use on the 1995 is not connected to their newer website, which is built around the 2020 version. So you have to get that link. And if you can't find it, just leave me a comment somewhere on the website. Ask the question. I'll get notified when anybody adds anything to the site, and I'll give you an answer. But cross-references are closely related and helpful to a concordance, and they supplement it by providing something that a concordance cannot provide. A concordance, you'll recall, is a listing of every word, if it's an exhaustive concordance, every occurrence of that word in the Bible. Of course, if it's selective, it's just some subset of those. Whereas a cross-reference is a notation in the Bible itself, which tells you other verses which are related to it. So I'm going to try to show that to you. I'm going to move the camera around, so if you get dizzy easily, just kind of look away a little bit. And I'm going to try to flip this around if I can figure out a way to do it real time. It is not letting me do that. Or at least, if it's letting me, it has not told me how to make that change. So apparently, as soon as I started this video, it did that. Maybe I can do it this way. So let's see if you can read this. It looks like everything's backwards. That's not going to help. Well, sorry I seem to be wasting your time this morning, but maybe if I hold it like this and give you the general idea. You find a Bible. First of all, it's got to be a Bible that's big enough. See how big this thing is? It's got to be big enough to allow these. A lot of times the Bible, they're trying to make them small enough to fit in your hand, not be so bulky when you carry them around, and so they don't have room. But here you see down this side of the page, and it's on the same on the other side as well. All this runs through, and there's one for almost every verse, not every single one. So if you can kind of picture that in your mind and remember it. And then if you look at these, now this Bible is opened up to Mark chapter 13 and 14, the last part of 13, first part of 14. At the top, it says 29, and that's connected to verse 29, which is right across from it. So I'm reading this one right here, and it reads across. And the first thing here is it's got what would be called a footnote. Here it's called a side note because it appears up here, but a certain word in here could be translated a different way. Like the verse as translated reads, "Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near, right at the door." And that word recognize could also be traveled know, K-N-O-W. And so there's a note there. It's got a little number 1 by the word recognize. And if I look over to the left in this column, I see that it has or know in italics. And then where it says he is near, I see a footnote 2. And if I go over to the left, it says or it. In other words, it reads, recognize that he is near. It could have been translated, know that he is near, or know that it is near. or recognize that it is near. So those aren't technically cross-references, but they're part of what's in this column. Same thing on verse 30. And then we get down to verse 32. And by it says Matthew 24:36 and Acts 1:7. So if I were to turn to Matthew 24:36 and Acts 1:7, I would see verses that have something to do with this. So verse 32 here says, "But of that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but the Father alone." Now I would imagine that the Matthew 24 reference is just Matthew's version of that same statement. And then Acts 1:7, that's probably when that was right before Jesus ascended into heaven. And that was probably his disciples asking him, is it at this time that you're restoring the kingdom to Israel? And then he answers, it's not for you to know times and epochs which the Father has set by his own authority. So that's the sort of thing here. It connects you to other verses which deal with the same information. Sometimes, like if a verse mentions Passover, you might find a cross-reference and it'll take you back into the Old Testament where they talked about Passover. But a lot of times, and that a concordance would find for you. But what makes the cross-reference different from a concordance is that it's not focused on the words per se. So it's not specifically going to connect you with words, the same words in other verses, but same idea or related ideas. And so this sort of broadens out what you can learn from a concordance. So when you're reading a Bible, when you're reading the Bible, a concordance will help, but also the cross-reference will help. Sometimes you stumble over a verse, you don't know what it means. You can use the concordance to look up the words in the verse to see how they're used in other places. Or if you understand all the words but just don't understand the idea, then you can use the cross-reference to see, okay, well, where is this idea being talked about somewhere else? Or some parts of this idea being talked about somewhere else. And I find them very rewarding. Even when I understand a verse, I can use these. So if you've got time and you want to sit down and really reflect on a chapter and break it down and understand it, you can study it word by word with a concordance, and you can study it phrase by phrase or verse by verse with a good cross-reference. Now, the cross-references in each Bible are different. The translation committee will use different resources for that. And there are also some online versions. I have not used them much, but I know they exist, and I want to, but there's just so many things I want to study in the Bible that I haven't gotten around to doing that yet. But what I'll do is I'll put the links to that in the description box of this video, and you can check some of those out. And since they're online, they are not limited by length, and they have lots more, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 times as many cross-references, because they're not limited by the size of this column here. They can just stuff it and do pages and pages of it. Now, I think most, if not all of these, started out as just big books, but online, again, there's no limit, so you don't have to worry about the bigness of it. But cross-references should not be overlooked. They're a very helpful way of studying the Bible, letting the Bible interpret the Bible, let one part of the Bible help you understand another part of the Bible. It has so many different authors, so many different books. Both concordances and cross-references will really help you a lot. Thanks for letting me tell you about that.